Hey everybody, welcome to today's session on teaching the whole child. Today we're going to discuss social emotional learning, what it is, and how it can play a pretty impactful role when done correctly in the world of physical education. So just a little bit about myself before we get started. My name is Mike Martinez. I'm a middle school PE teacher up here in New York City, currently in my 11th year overall. And as you can see from my breakdown there, I've had quite a quite a varied bit of experience over the last decade or so. I've taught K through 8 for several years, traditional elementary K through 4 for 3 years. I taught high school for 2 years. Now I'm back teaching just middle school for the last 2 years. So that wide variety of experience has really given me a pretty good lens into what high quality PE could and should look like at every level through the K through 12 spectrum, and has definitely given me a wealth of knowledge to help inform my instruction moving forward. I'm also part of the Open National Training Team, which I've been for a little over 3 years now. So always like to give those folks a plug for kind of allowing me to do the things that I do and get to work with teachers like you. Unfortunately, not in person this time, but even in a virtual sense, I'm proud to be able to work with you folks today. So my goals for today are to kind of go step by step and uncover the what, the why, and the how of social emotional learning. I'm sure no matter what part of the country you're in, SEL is a pretty buzzy topic, something that everyone's talking about as a very necessary component in this reopening and rebuilding plan. And the question that I continually hear come up from colleagues and other teachers in every discipline, not just in PE, is that we agree that it needs to take place, but how do we do it? What does that mean? What does it look like? And how can we make it work given all the other constructs that we're trying to navigate around? So we'll kind of take each part bit by bit and hopefully unpack that process for you today. So first, let's talk about what is social emotional learning. Well, SEL is simply the process through which children and adults understand and manage their emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. Now, I just want to pause right there. Looking at those 5 bullets, those are, to me at least, those are things that every single person I can think of in the world, myself included, can benefit from getting a little bit better at, right? We've all had interactions with students, with colleagues, with relatives, with strangers, where being able to manage one's emotions probably would have helped the situation end a little bit better than it did, right? One thing that we always preach to children is the ability to set goals. What does that mean? What does that look like? So being able to understand what achievable goals are, how to set those goals, how to achieve those goals, and how to continue building that plan going forward is a critical skill in a young person's life or any person's life, really. Feeling and showing empathy is something that there's certainly not enough of in the world these days, I don't think, and something that is not always or hardly ever explicitly taught. What does it mean to actually put yourself in someone else's position, to feel what they're feeling, and not necessarily have sympathy for them, but have empathy for that person and the situation? And one that I'm focusing key on this year so far is establishing and maintaining positive relationships. For my new 5th grade babies who are starting middle school for the first time virtually and not being able to sit at a lunch table with friends or have recess with friends and have that personal interaction where they build new relationships, it's going to be incredibly critical to teach what it means to establish a positive relationship and how to maintain that as we grow from younger students who tend to be a little bit more, you know, for lack of a better term, self-centered, or focusing solely on what's important to them, and building that out into including and incorporating the thoughts and feelings of others in a positive, meaningful way. And last but not least, I don't know anyone in the world who could not stand to have a little bit of a brush up on making responsible decisions, especially my young people in middle school. As our brains are still forming at that formative preteen, teenage, and even into high school years, being able to understand what a responsible decision is and the ramifications of not making a responsible decision is a key component that would make every facet of our lives, especially in school, a much easier, smoother road for us to navigate. So when we break down social emotional learning, we usually break it down into 5 key core competencies. And those are, as you can see on the graphic, being self-aware, being able to manage oneself, being socially aware, again, building those relationship skills, and ending with responsible decision making. These are things that are not necessarily, they're not tangible, they're not concrete, they're fluid situations. Your self-awareness or your ability to regulate yourself might change from day to day based on situations outside your control, your environment. So these are definitely things that we want to embed in our curriculum, uh, not just specifically in physical education, but make it part of the overall learning process. Because I feel like growing up, these are things that you just assume are being taught in the home. These are things that parents are working on with their child, and that just simply isn't always the case. So being able to weave this into what we do with the kids that we see every single day, 6, 7, 8 hours a day, is going to play a huge role in how they continue to build upon these same skills and situations over their K through 12 spectrum. Now, I want to shift our focus a little bit to the idea of trauma, because I feel like the reason why the social emotional learning movement has been pushed forward so aggressively and rapidly in this reopening process is that we're all dealing with some form of trauma through this global pandemic, right? Regardless of what your level of exposure or experience or unfortunately loss was, we're all dealing with some form of trauma on some level. If it was just as simple as you were locked in the house for 6 months and couldn't go anywhere or do anything, that has a negative effect on your well-being, your feelings and your emotions. If, unfortunately, God forbid, you were someone who lost friends or family members through this time, then your level of trauma was even more significant and severe. But these are all things that students, parents, teachers, administrators are all bringing back into the school environment in the fall of 2020. So it's critical that we have a very intentional way of dealing with this trauma moving forward. And trauma is usually defined as a threatening episode or event in which a person is involved or witnesses, and as a result feels intensely unsafe. So the key here being you don't necessarily even have to be the one involved. Sometimes experiencing, hearing, or seeing a threatening or unsettling event can result in some sort of trauma that we're bringing on with us. And that leads us to the idea of secondhand trauma. And I think this is essentially critical, ultimately critical for us as teachers. And that's that indirect exposure to a firsthand account or narrative of a traumatic event. So thinking about little Johnny when he comes to school on Monday and tells you that his uncle passed away from COVID over the weekend, or hearing an unsettling story about a family who had to relocate and are now trying to do long distance learning from outside the city because they couldn't they couldn't stay where they're currently housed. As teachers, there's no shortage of these unsettling stories that we are bringing in ourselves and also accumulating from our students who we spend the majority of our time with, right? So I think being able to have a plan in place as a school, as a building, as a district to identify and address this trauma is probably the first step in building an environment where SEL is always present and a key part in the learning process. I'm sure as time moves on, you're going to hear this term trauma informed teaching. That simply means that your teaching is purposely planned for and is helping to actively establish a culture of safety, empowerment, and healing. So not necessarily changing what we're teaching or when we're teaching it, but making sure we're building in those little safety nets where every single person who's involved in the learning process feels safe, feels empowered, and has an opportunity to express their feelings as part of the healing process. Now, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly as we move on. But the key here is that I think this process needs to start around the idea of building trust. And as any relationship goes, in order to build that trust, and when I say relationship, I'm not even talking about just students to adults, right? We're talking about students amongst themselves or even peers, adult to adult, whether it's colleagues or teacher to administrator, being part of a relationship where you feel safe to express yourself, to be vulnerable, and empowered to take leadership when necessary. Without trust, none of those things can happen. A student won't open up to you or to a friend unless they feel there's trust in that relationship. They won't be able to take the first few steps in healing unless they feel safe and trust within that relationship. So being purposeful about incorporating those three components is paramount in starting the SEL process. So now we talk a little bit about what SEL is. Let's talk a little bit more about why this is important. And as I've begun to make this more of a focal point of my own teaching, these are kind of the three questions that I always come back to. The first one is, what am I doing? And the second one is, why am I doing it? And the third one is the key, which is, what is the why to your why? So I guess a quick example of this could be, what am I doing? One thing that I love doing is just something weird that's ingrained in my personality. I love giving other people compliments. I make it a point every single day to give at least 3 genuine compliments to anyone. It could be coworkers, could be students, could be a stranger walking down the street. It's just something that I love doing. I've been doing it for years, and just kind of part of who I am. Which leads to question 2, why am I doing it? Well, if I think about it, the reason why I'm doing it is because it takes me 2 seconds to say, hey, Joe, nice tie, and then keep walking. But the hope is that what took me 2 seconds will keep a smile on his face for 5 minutes or 5 hours or the next 5 days, who knows? But then let's break it down further and discover, what is the why to my why? Why is it important to me that I do that? And maybe if I were to do some self-analysis, some self-therapy over here, I would come to realize that I love that feeling of being complimented so much that I want to share that feeling with as many people as I can. So digging deeper into why are we doing what we're doing, and then why is that important to us, helps to unpack this process as we move forward with it. Let's watch a short video that talks a little bit more about understanding your why.
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. But now I see.
Okay. Here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
What an unbelievable message. And I can't help but thinking about how that same message can translate not even just to our students, but to ourselves, right? My first thought was kind of giving our students that message, that purpose behind everything we do. Because I mean, the realness is not every student is going to love every activity we do, and especially if you're in a virtual environment, it might be even harder to motivate certain students to want to be physically active, to want to move more. I think providing that why helps to build that purpose. But even us as adults, as teachers, we often know what we need to do. We're good at that. That's part of our job, right? But always keeping the why at the forefront sometimes is all you need to give that little extra, or to do it with your heart as opposed with just your mind. So love that little segment there in terms of understanding the why and how it relates to our what. So now I want to talk about the how. How does this actually manifest itself in my classroom? A lot of it can be done in small ways, giving students the opportunity to feel empowered, to feel safe, to feel heard. And one way I try doing that is by amplifying student voice. It could be as simple as creating a student playlist and using that as the music that you have in your class. For many years, obviously not being in the gym now, it's a little bit different. But whenever I give a unit test or a quiz, the last question is always, what's one song that's not on Mr. Martinez's playlist that you would love to hear played in class? And then each week or month or however often we collect those, I add those songs to it just to see those kids' faces light up when the song they chose gets played. Or every once in a while, we'll even take requests during the middle of class, and kids can run over and request a song. And while they're in their activity, I can search it up on Spotify real quick and give them the opportunity to feel like, hey, that was my song that's being played. A great virtual activity that we just did this year recently was I asked kids, what's the one song that when you need to get pumped up for a big event or when you're trying to get yourself going in the morning that really, really pumps you up? And then make a playlist of those songs. So every time, so you know that if a kid comes into your gym or your space or you see them on virtual classes and they don't look quite themselves, they look a little bit down, maybe that's the song that's playing as they come into the Zoom room or the Google Meets room or whatever the case may be to help pump people up. A very, very small step that can have a pretty good impact. Think about when you hear your favorite song, how that makes you feel on the inside. The second is implementing more class conversation. When it's in person, things like a quick think, pair, share, where kids get to talk to each other. And then when I'm done speaking with my partner, I'm going to share out what he or she shared, not what I wanted to share. It shows that I was listening to you. I acknowledge what you heard, and I'm going to share that with the group. Virtually, I've been able to do that with an app or a website called Padlet. Padlet is a free site that allows you to post really any kind of conversation topic you want, and kids can leave what looks like little post-its on the site, and then their classmates can comment on them. When I do it as an assignment, it guarantees that all 30 kids in my class get to have their answer put out there for the world to see. And then I usually make it a requirement that by the end of the week, you have to comment on at least 2 other people's posts as well. So by the end of the week, everyone has had their comment posted on at least one time, and gives those students who maybe don't always get heard in class or don't get the opportunity to speak, or maybe don't want to speak out loud in class, it gives them the opportunity to feel validated and have that interaction amongst each other instead of it always coming from the teacher instead. And the last one, which has been pretty important to me and to my school, is the idea of equality versus equity. I think there's a huge push for equality in schools, right? Making sure every kid has the same thing, that no one's being denied access to a material or to a resource. But when we dig a little deeper, there is a difference between equality and equity. And I feel like this picture, this graphic, illustrates that perfectly. In the equality side, each student was given a box to help them see over the fence. But one student is noticeably taller than the rest, and one student's in a wheelchair. So the student who's head and shoulders taller than everybody else didn't actually need the box, but to be equal, he was given one. The student in the wheelchair can't get on top of the box, so it was still equal, but doesn't help him or her out either. Equity is making sure that everyone has the same access, the same, I guess, entrance point to a question, an activity, whatever the case may be. So it's not always giving everyone the same, but giving them the same opportunity to move forward. So digging more into the how, I mentioned that program's second step before, which again does have a cost attached to it. I think it's something, I don't know, $3,000 or $4,000 for your school for the year. There's tons and tons and tons of resources. If you're not familiar, on openphys.org that are 100% free for you to peruse and to use in your classes. On the right-hand side here, we see a graphic from a free virtual PD led by Open's executive director, Aaron Hart, and one of our national trainers, Nicole Wilder, on how to advocate and implement SEL in your PE program. And on the left side is one of our academic vocab cards for the word courage. So helping you to teach students the language that goes along with social emotional learning, to also help build vocabulary, fluency, and those ELA goals that I'm sure most students are always working towards. So a great free tie-in available on openphys.org. Before we get more to the resources, I want to talk about what this looks like in practice. So one of the activities that we were successful in implementing we call it the concept skill reflection loop. So first I start with a broad social emotional concept, right? Something like optimism plus effort equals success. And teaching that idea that when you're optimistic or thinking positively about something, you're more likely to put more effort into it, more work into it. When you put more effort into something, you increase your chances of being more successful. When you're more successful, you have a more positive outlook and are more optimistic about trying it again. And that just keeps that loop going around and around. And then we narrow it down to a specific topic, a specific unit. Let's say fitness, for example. And then narrow that down even further. Today we're working on push-ups, building upper body strength. So the actual activity that we're pushing forward to the students is a Tabata-style push-up progression, where every 20 seconds they're going to try to do as many push-ups as they can, rest for 10 seconds, do 20 seconds, rest for 10, so on and so forth. But the SEL component is to write down something motivating that will help you stay optimistic while you're performing your progression. And then at the end, we'll have some form of reflection, whether it's one of those think, pair, shares again, or depth of knowledge questioning, or journaling, something to help them think about how they felt during the activity and what they noticed about how their motivating word helped them move forward. So here you see some pictures of some mismatched socks, some stinky feet, and some motivating words or phrases the kids jotted down to help carry them forward. And again, what I love about this, it's coming from within. So it teaches them that their motivation, their inspiration doesn't have to come from an external source. It can come from within. And then these words, these phrases, whenever you're feeling like you want to give up, peek down at your board real quick and remember, you're strong. You can do it. Remember, inspire. Remember, you want to brag to your mom. This one girl in particular had challenged her mom that by the end of the unit that she could do more push-ups than her mom could. So she was working towards that goal there. But just a little way to get kids to really see that connection between that loop and that again does not need to necessarily only pertain to physical education. Really anything in life that we are passionate about, that we're excited about, we're going to work harder towards. And the more we work towards something, the easier it becomes and the more successful or the better chance at success we have. When we succeed, we feel good, we feel optimistic, we feel hopeful. That leads us to want to work harder again, which leads to more success. And that loop just keeps going round and round. So this is a very, very short 2-minute, again, exit ticket or closure or a journal activity, but a way to teach a very, very deep rooted, impactful skill that kids can take anywhere else in life, not just the four walls of our gym, but into other classrooms, into their home life, into anything that they're working towards. If you want to make it an exit ticket or a journal activity, those 2 bullet points that there at the bottom help to push this forward. What's one goal in your life that you've put maximum effort towards achieving? Excuse me. And then write about why you dedicated so much of your energy and effort towards that one thing. At the end of last school year, once we went fully remote, I dove deep into this social emotional journaling and trying to get kids to make connections between things that are going on, how it makes them feel, and examine that process a little bit. And usually I would model that example to give them an idea, one, of what it looks like to be vulnerable, but two, what it looks like to really dive into those feelings. So one thing that I'm currently devoting a lot of effort towards is trying to learn how to play the guitar. And again, thinking about why am I doing this? Well, I'm doing it because I've wanted to play my whole life, and I know that if I don't work hard towards it, it's never going to happen. And then examine the why behind my why. Well, deep down, I love music. I love the way it makes me feel, especially when I'm not feeling so great. I can easily turn my mood around with the right song, or if I am in a good mood, the right song can take me to another level of happiness. So being able to create that sound, create that music, I think would benefit me long term emotionally and hopefully provide that feeling for others as well. So giving that example can then let kids take the idea and run with it. And you'd be surprised when you ask your kids to talk about something that's deeply personal to them. Oftentimes it has nothing to do with school. Oftentimes it has nothing to do with whatever you thought you were going to get as an answer. And it just helps to strengthen those relationships, build that trust, build that safety between you and your students. So now let's talk a little bit more about all the goods that openphysed.org has available to us. And when you go on to, if you have not been on the website in a while, if you haven't been on there at all, you're going to find it looks a little bit different than it did back in March of 2020. Tons and tons of new materials that are devoted specifically towards the reopening process and specifically the social emotional component of the reopening process. So you'll see for grades K through 2, for 3 through 5, and for middle school, they've unveiled what's called the Go Be Great program, which is fully developed around social emotional learning with activities that lend themselves to it. There's a 10-week priority outcomes map. So thinking about the Shape America grade level outcomes, this is a very similar structure, but specifically designed and devoted towards social emotional learning, which doesn't really exist in the Shape outcomes. But if you're familiar with one, this will be a very easy transition for you as well. And also the Varsity Brand Empowerment Journal, where that optimism, effort, success loop came from. There's a 10-week sample of that journal in there. Now, to clarify, the Empowerment Journal is actually provided by Varsity Brands, which is the parent company of US Games, which is the company that funds Open. So it's kind of like a trickle down effect there. Because it's not offered by Open, but by Varsity Brands, there is a cost attached to that as well. But the 10-week sample is free of charge. It's available on Open. And depending on how often you see your kids, that 10-week sample, if you don't see them every day, could easily last you the majority of the school year, depending on how long you're remote or operating in an alternate schedule situation. The high school version of the Go Be Great series is called the Believe in You series. It's a video series that was designed by Kevin Atlas, the gentleman in the bottom right hand corner there. And if you're not familiar with Kevin, he was the first ever Division One scholarship athlete to be born with a disability. As you can see, he only has one arm, but yet played fully scholarship basketball for Manhattan College, not too far from here in Manhattanville College in New York City area. Great guy, very, very impactful public speaker. And the video series, I believe there's 9 or 10 episodes per season, all deal with these similar soft skills that we're talking about, right? Things like perseverance, building relationships, doing for others, making responsible choices, and have these reflections and these journals attached to it as well. Again, I dove hugely into these at the end of last year. Even though it's labeled as a high school activity, I dove into it with my seventh graders and thought it was incredibly impactful. I would recommend it maybe even as low as third, fourth, and fifth grade as well. I think there's definitely meaning to be gained there. And one thing, just to give those a little bit of a plug, that I thought was huge. Again, I had kids who in person weren't really super outgoing, or at least I didn't feel like I had a great relationship with, who would unveil some pretty deeply personal things in journals. There's a different kind of dynamic when you're typing something on a Word doc versus talking face to face to somebody. I'll never forget one of the journal prompts was, "What's one thing that you're hopeful for moving forward?" And again, this is at a time when people weren't, optimism was not in abundance during March, April, and May of last year. And I was thinking something along the lines of, I'm hopeful that we can come back together in school someday, or I'm hopeful that this virtual learning will stop soon. This one girl who probably didn't say more than 2 or 3 words to me all school year wrote that she was hopeful that mom and dad would stop fighting and that they might get to spend the holidays as a family. And I mean, I'm getting emotional thinking about it now, but that just shook me to my core in thinking about, I didn't think I was particularly close with this young lady. I didn't think she felt particularly close to me. And here she is opening up, what must be a pretty sensitive and personal wound. And now what do I do with that information? I don't know if I handled it correctly, but all I could do was thank her for sharing and extend myself and say, hey, if you ever need anything, I'm here for you. But knowing that our kids are dealing with trauma that we don't always get to see and we're not always privy to, sometimes giving them an outlet, like a writing sample, is a way that can open that up in our classrooms that might not be available to them anywhere else. So I highly recommend checking out all these resources on Open and using them as best as you see fit. If you're in the middle school and high school range, I highly recommend the Believe in You series and the free curriculums that come with those. The empowerment journals and the Go Be Great stuff on Open is definitely, I think, a must look at. Again, the beauty of Open is that you don't need to commit to anything. If you look at an 80-page document and only want to use 2 pages of it, take what you like, leave the rest. But I definitely think there's lots of good stuff that folks of all grade levels could benefit from in those resources. And probably the thing I want to end on is just a reminder that when we talk about social emotional learning, when we talk about dealing with feelings and dealing with emotions, we're not just talking about students. These are unprecedented times. I feel like that was being said 6 months ago, and not much has changed, right? We're still dealing with things that have never come up before in ways that have never come up before, and putting a new meaning to the phrase building the plane as we fly it. So the one thing the analogy I always think of is when you're back in the day when we used to be able to travel on airplanes, that announcement that you have to fix your own oxygen mask before helping someone else with it. Unless we are in a place to deal with and acknowledge and understand and regulate our emotions, we're going to have a pretty hard time doing that for the little ones who need us the most. So what I try to do is reflect on who are those who are constantly filling my bucket, who are constantly adding positivity to my life, and make sure that I reach out to them and thank them, because I feel like if nothing else, trying to find the silver lining in these crazy times, I feel like I've been able to reach out to folks who don't live in my neighborhood, who I don't see every day, thanks to Zoom and FaceTime and all these things, and see these people more often and really reap the benefits of rekindling and strengthening those relationships. So I threw this little slide together. You probably don't know most of these people, but this is just an example of my team, of my network, the people in my life who mean the absolute world to me, who always put a smile on my face, who are always there for me. I try to make sure I reach out to them as often as I can, even if it's just a quick text message or a real short phone call, just to say hi, let them know I'm thinking of them. Things like social media make it easy for us to do that. Just a little reminder: reach out to your team. Make sure you're thanking them. Make sure you're filling their buckets and thanking them for doing the same for you. And last but not least, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for taking the time to be here in this session today, for understanding that SEL is a pretty important component of navigating this new normal and trying to get students and yourselves and your colleagues back to a place that feels comfortable, that feels safe, and where we can begin to rely on trust that even if we can't predict the future, we know that if we go through it together, we're going to end up okay. Thank you for making a difference in the lives of your students by teaching in this profession. It is not easy. It is not always fun, but my goodness, it is worth it. Thank you so much, folks. You have my personal information on here now, my email address, my Twitter and Instagram handles there. Please don't ever hesitate to reach out, whether it's about social emotional learning, phys ed in general, if you just want to talk shop or talk about anything, really. I love interacting with hardworking folks just like each and every one of you, and I hope to hear from you soon. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and thanks for coming to this session today.
Thank you for attending the 48th Annual Elementary Physical Education Workshop. We're glad you were here.
Please follow us on our social media platforms. EPEW can be found on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
Please check out our website for links to more great sessions. Just go to epew-cp.weebly.com and click on the virtual EPEW 2021 tab at the top and scroll down.
EPEW 2021 Educators Assemble would not be possible without the support and dedication from the amazing EPEW committee. The committee has been hard at work for months preparing for this workshop. Thank you to Linda McGee, Barbara Groton, Scott Wilson, Stephanie Sandino, Julie Miller, Jessica Monlux, Kayla Ailman, Shelby Lozano, Andrea Chavez, Scott Townsend, and Cindy Chase.
Thank you for attending EPEW, where our motto is, come to learn, leave as family.